Hello, my name is Catherine Gloston, and this is my Module 5 discussion on distance education and e-learning. The points of discussion for this presentation first will be the transactional distance theory, then the community of inquiry model, next the relevance of transactional distance theory and community of inquiry model, and then the theories, which will be the relevance and usefulness with advancements of tech. So first, I'll discuss the transactional distance theory and giving the meaning and some brief examples. So the transactional distance, it refers to the psychological or communicative space that separates instructor from learner in the transaction between them, occurring in the structured or planned learning situation. So here's the three elements of transactional distance theory. There's dialogue, which is developed by teachers and learners in the course of the interactions that occur when one gives instructions and the other responds. So basically that two-way form of communication. Structure is the way in which the teaching program is structured so that it can be delivered through the various communications media. And then there's learner anatomy, which is basically you'd rather see the learner determine the goals and develop those experiences and evaluate the decision on the learning program versus the teacher doing all of the hard work. So this chart, it depicts the relationship between dialogue and structure and how that all affects transactional distance. So within these relationships, you can see that if you actually change up those types of communications media, you're able to increase the dialogue between the learner and the teacher. And if you do that, that reduces that transactional distance. Whereas if you have a program and it's highly structured and there's no dialogue, it's basically non-existent, that dialogue between the teacher and the learner, then you'll see a big rise in that transactional distance. So you can reduce that by incorporating like teleconference programs or anything where there is more dialogue, where there's much more dialogue and little predetermined structure. All right, and that would keep the transactional distance low, which we really want to make. That's the ultimate goal, is to decrease the transactional distance. And here's another quick chart just to give you that third factor wherein the learner anatomy comes into play and how it impacts the levels as far as transactional distance. So remember, in learner anatomy, we would like to see the learner determining goals and learning experiences and doing the evaluation versus the teacher. So you all have a greater transactional distance if you have more anatomy of the learner, meaning the level of anatomy required of the learner, if that increases, then you'll see an increase in transactional distance. So just being mindful of how the course is designed, and if you have a tight structure with minimum dialogue, you're increasing that transactional distance. So the goal again is to reduce the transactional distance. So just being mindful of your structure and your dialogue and that learner anatomy. So that's why all three parts play an important part in transactional distance. So what I wanted to do was look at transactional distance through the e-learning generations. So there were three generations that were discussed in the Gross and Powell both article. And so the first generation, it was more of a generic type of virtual learning that was going on. So the idea was that e-learning was a kind of teaching using computers. They were centered on the content and they overlooked the interaction. There was no dialogue. So that transactional distance in that generation was very high. Then in the second generation, they incorporated that human factor, or what we would say the interaction that would come into play. And during this generation, we see Web 2.0, mobile technologies, and all of those are helping the e-learning generation grow. So as such, transitional distance has decreased as we have now structure and dialogue that's come into play. Then you have the third generation where now it's involving technology and self-learning. For example, we see those flipped classrooms. And so in these virtual environments, students are able to ask questions, share material, and participate in forum discussions. That's why here in the third generation, we see a significantly low amount of transactional distance. So now let's move on to the community of inquiry model. So Garrison et al. Stated a worthwhile educational experience is embedded within a community of inquiry that is composed of teachers and students, the key participants in the educational process. So in the community of inquiry model, there are three presences. So you have teaching, social, and cognitive. Now with teaching, it's basically how it sounds. All right. Teaching is the design, facilitation, and direction of cognitive and social processes for the purpose of realizing personally meaningful and educational worthwhile learning outcomes. Whereas with social, that's when the participants, they're communicating with purpose. They're building those relationships by projecting their individual personalities. And then in cognitive, this is where we're able to construct and conform our meanings and reflections and build out those inquiry skills. So the community of inquiry framework, it represents a process of creating a deep and meaningful, and when I say meaningful, like the collaborative and constructivist learning experience through the development of three elements: social, cognitive, and teaching. Now I like to start with teaching because I think we kind of tend to, if we teach, then it'll help with that social and that cognitive presence. So the teaching presence, what happens here is you have to have that instructor guidance, the building of the understanding and the motivation. And so the students will be able to initiate discussions. They'll be able to share personal meanings and focus in on those discussions. Then that will help them with the engagement and the goals and the direction that you see on the chart. You'll be able to build up that social presence, right? So in the social presence, this is where we start to see that engagement with the participants. So in social presence, you want to have communication. You want to have this group cohesion and collaboration. And so the students, they'll begin to experience a value of learning. They'll have opportunities to express their views, and they'll be encouraging other students to collaborate. Then that brings them all over into the cognitive presence. And so with the cognitive presence, when you're thinking of that, you're thinking about engaging the students with the actual content. And so here you'll see challenges and questions and explorations of the problem and proposing these solutions and even a resolution. Whereas the students, yes, they may be sensing, they may be a little puzzled at times, but they're going to start connecting those ideas and applying new ideas and even sharing the information that they gained. So the educational experience is definitely a greater experience when you take in that community of inquiry model into play with those three presences. Transactional distance theory and community of inquiry model relevance to current and future learning. So now for some Q&A. So the first question was, to what extent are transactional distance theory and community of inquiry relevant to current and future online learning? So some statements that I know that kind of interests me, as well as some questions that I still asked myself, was like, do we keep transactional distance low? And so it was stated that large transactional distance will prohibit students from actively engaging with learning in the online course. Also, lots of times we read a lot, but there are many online courses where we don't talk as much. So we need to decrease that transactional distance by using those discussion forums and presentations where we're able to, have a two-way form of communication. Those are nice, and they're also engaging, and they increase that dialogue, which decreases that transactional distance. Another thing that I was asking myself was, are all three presences of community of inquiry required? And I actually, after going through a few different resources, I see how the teaching presence starts off the flow of being social and building up those cognitive presence. So I definitely see why all three presences are required. And then the last thing that I noticed is that the use of uh, community of inquiry and tech in the classroom. So here's where those learning management systems are a good tool. They can bring in all three presences. And it's a big thing to consider and think about, is that it gives you that ability to be able to teach um, and structure everything. And then from there, the students are able to be social and collaborate. And then from there, they're able to gain that knowledge and build that cognitive presence. So I think that the LMS definitely is a good tool that helps model that community of inquiry relevance to online learning. Now for the theories, relevance and usefulness with the advancement of technology. So the next question that was posed was, what types of theories would be more relevant and useful with the advances of computer and internet technologies? So in the article by Gross and Palvo, they discussed about four different theories. So I put all four on there just so that you have an idea of what they are. But the biggest two that stuck out to me was that connectivist theory and the constructivist theory. And so the connectivist theory is that learning through a network environment where knowledge is distributed across the web and people's engagement with it constitutes learning. So here, I think that this theory is very useful with the advancement, because using the web, we're able to communicate and connect with other people and learn from others through the use of like social media and blogs. So to me, that's where that technology works with that connectivist theory. The next theory is the constructivist theory. Now, when you think about the constructivist theory, think about cognitism, when you learn by doing, and constructivism, when you build on your prior knowledge. So the constructivist theory, it's the learning involves collaboration and engagement. So technology is viewed as a tool according to the constructivists. And so learners should have access to the latest technology to ensure prompt access to knowledge as it becomes available. By using the constructivist and technology um, theories together, uh, such as like Web 2.0, teachers can provide opportunities for learners to observe, ask questions, practice, and validate their knowledge. And so when you're thinking about con- constructivism part, that's where you're building on that prior knowledge and constructing your own knowledge. So those are those hands-on experiences. To me, when I think of being hands-on, I would like to be more hands-on when it comes down to like artificial intelligence. To me, that's something where, you kind of like you use what you already know about your cell phones and everything else in order to be able to use that artificial intelligence and construct your own knowledge when it comes down to, you know, using artificial intelligence in the classroom. And the other two are associative theory. So when you think about the associative theory, that's learning occurs through structured tasks, such as that behaviorism. And so in the behaviorism, it does have some usefulness with that theory um, with regards to computers and internet, because what teachers can do is allow students to passively use their technology tools. And then from there, they'll be able to build up their knowledge based off of their interactions. And so then that situative theory, that's learning is viewed as a social practice and learning through social interaction. Ultimately, it's like learner centered. So to me, the situative theory, it's similar to my thoughts on the connectivist theory, where basically you think about the social media and the blogs, your Facebook, your Twitters, your wikis. Those are those things where the being social and learning through that interaction, learning from others, I think is a big part of that situation theory for me. Now for the wrap up. So e-learning is an anytime, any place type of learning. It doesn't require lectures, but I definitely highly encourage that two-way communication and interaction. That's where you're going to see the engagement coming in when not only are you as the teacher are able to communicate and the students are able to communicate back with you with that back and forth, but also that peer-to-peer interaction is definitely something that's required. Many of the theories do support technology integration, and they definitely give us great examples on how we can enhance and advance our use of technology in the classroom just by connecting certain theories with the technology integration. So this definitely is necessary to think about that communication, the dialogue, keeping the social interaction going inside of our lessons when we're doing our e-learning. Those are all great things that we need to make sure to create those effective learning environments. Here's my references used. Thank you for your time and patience. Have a wonderful day.